Welcome, everybody. I think everybody here knows me, but if there's anybody watching, my name is Martin. I'm a member of our Tibetan Buddhist Society community here. So we'll begin our meditation and study of the path to enlightenment by doing the preliminary prayers, beginning first with the prayer of praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 19 of the prayer book. And we'll do all of these prayers except for the Great Treasury of Excellence in both Tibetan and English today. Tempa chandende dejin shepa drachampa yangdapa sope sanje repa dang shapsu tempa dewa shepa jitin champa Jeburo e kaloju lana me pa ladang minam chitampa samje chandende Rajawa shakya tupala shasaru churu chapsu chiu. Teacher, Bhagawan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly pure and complete Buddha, all-knowing, having poise, Sugata, apprehender of the world, navigator of beings to be subdued, incomparable, teacher of gods and humans, to the Buddha, the Bhagawan, the glorious conqueror Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And the refuge in Bodhicitta prayer. Sangyecho dang soji cho nam la jang jo badu danye chao su chi tai ge jin soji pe so nam ji do Sangye Drobasho. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. Short and hour offering. Saji Pochi Jurjin Medodram Era Lengshiniere Jambari Sangye Jendumente Oaji Drokan Nam Dajenla Chapasho. This ground anointed with perfumes and strewn with flowers, Mount Meru, the four continents, adorned with sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered thus, may all beings enjoy such pilgrimages. The seven-limbed prayer. I prostrate my three doors with a mind of respect and offer all actually arranged and mentally emanated offerings. I reveal all the downfalls and negativities that I have ever collected and rejoice in the virtues of individuals and superiors. Please remain perfectly abiding until samsara is no longer seen. I request you to turn the vast and profound wheels of Dharma. I dedicate the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. The prayer of lineage of gurus. Unso gele jeve trompe ku taye drove rewa conveso malu sheja jishin zikpetu shache tso de la gojatsa dame tamba ye se chicho Jove sepa kunchi konane Tame shendo trope namro Me pam jampe yang lo shaz Shendo papa kava jave Yijin gong pa jose san Lodro tome chene sasum yang su drope shable do chasa Shingda jembo yele shupe samu tawa jachen chupe mano yang su zupe ne dupe Dambe zin ame zela dojo kanji lamji nezope jishin zekshin seve dom zepe jalve damcho malu zinpai lo sandrape bella shasa Rab Sham Sumra Kun La Tave Mi Kelzang Tapa Depe Jumocho Seve Chope Take Serpai Saze Genyen Nomla Guchaksa Body born from a million magnificent excellent virtues speech fulfilling the hopes of infinite beings, a mind that sees all objects of knowledge precisely, I bow my head to the chief among the Shakyas. Supreme sons of the incomparable teacher, carrying the load of all the conqueror's deeds by their emanations appearing in countless realms, I prostrate to Maitreya and Manjushri. The mother of conquerors is difficult to fathom. The precise thought is in commentaries written by Jambudvipa's ornaments, Nagarjuna and Asanga. I prostrate at the feet of those most renowned in the three realms. From these two great chariots come the excellent lineages of the paths of profound view and vast deeds, their essential points gathered thoroughly and without fault. Prostration to the Lamb, holding this treasury of instruction. Giving explanation to compassion by seeing precisely and completely the essential points of all paths of Sutra and Tantra. Holder of the Conqueror's entire holy Dharma, prostration to the glorious Losangdrakpa. I, seeing all the infinite teachings, supreme way of crossing for journeys liberation, moved by compassion to deeds skilled in method, prostration to the spiritual masters who make everything clear. And great treasury of excellent English. Page 27. The kind master is the basis of all qualities, and proper reliance is the root of the path. By seeing this excellence and through much striving, bestow blessings to be devoted with great respect. This gentle support of freedom obtained this one time is most difficult to achieve. Knowing its great value gives rise to a mind seizing its essence constantly day and night. Bestow blessings to generate this continual unceasingly. It is like a bubble in water, this constantly moving body and life. Thus remember the swift glance of death. Beyond death, like body and shadow, white and black karmic results follow after. By gaining firm certainty in this, the mass of faults, subtle and very subtle, are abandoned, and the accomplishment of all virtuous collections completed. Bestow blessings to ever attain conscientiousness. The qualities of samsara are unfit to be trusted. The door to all suffering. Do not be content with these enjoyments. By knowing its defects, bestow blessings to develop a great aspiration of the bliss of liberation. By that pure thought, great conscientiousness is drawn forth, and mindfulness and awareness of the individual liberation, the root of the teachings, bestow blessings to make this the essential practice. Just as I myself have fallen into samsara's ocean, all living beings as mother are also like that. By seeing the responsibility for the liberation of beings, bestow blessing to be trained in supreme bodhicitta. However, by merely generating the mind, if not acquainted with the three aspects of ethics, enlightenment will not be attained. By seeing this excellence, bestow blessings to train in strong effort in the vows of conqueror sons. Pacifying distraction toward perverse objects, by way of proper analysis of the perfect meaning, bestow blessings to swiftly and continuously generate the path related to the union of calm abiding and special insight. Thus, becoming a vessel trained in the common paths, enter the Vajrayana, supreme evolution of all vehicles. Bestow blessings to engage the easy path itself, that sacred way of crossing for fortunate beings. The base of practice for the two aspects of attainment is when guarding the pure vows of commitment is found to be genuine and certain. Bestow blessings to protect them even at risk of life. Then, by understanding properly the important points, which are the essence of the two stages of the Tantra classes, bestow blessings to practice according to these holy teachings, with continuous effort in the supreme four-session yoga. Like that, may the spiritual friend revealing the gentle path, and the friends of proper practice stand firm. Bestow blessings to quickly pacify the masses of outer and inner hindrances. In all rebirths, may I never be parted from perfect gurus and the enjoyment of the glorious Dharma. By utterly completing all qualities, paths and grounds, may I quickly achieve the state of Vajradhara. So I'll begin with some breathing meditation. So first, setting our physical posture. So we should be sitting comfortably. Our back relatively straight. Hands resting in the lap. Right hand on the left palm with the thumb tips touching. With our arms extended out slightly from the body at the elbow. Our shoulders level. Mouth, jaw, and tongue relaxed. With our head slightly tilted forward. Eyes half open, half closed. Then allowing our attention to withdraw from objects of the senses. Allowing our mind to center, settle and focus. Taking as the main object of attention the natural rise and fall of our breath. the early stages of the meditation session, our mind is still busy. Engaged in all the mental activity that occupied us before the session. And so we should consciously release all wandering to memories of the past, plans, or speculation about the future. For this short time, we abide simply and clearly in the present moment. As we simply rise, simply watch, observe the natural rise and fall of our breath. Mind is likely to be the most agitated. We use our mental factor of awareness to watch out for distraction, to mental wandering. And if we find that our mind has wandered to some other object, firmly but gently restore our attention to the breath. Simply watching it as it rises and falls. Also using our mental factor of awareness to detect if our mind is becoming heavy and sleepy. If our mind is like this, then we can apply a slightly tighter concentration to the object of meditation. On the other hand, if our mind is agitated, then we can slightly ease off how tightly we're holding the object of concentration. Not letting it go, but not holding it quite so tightly. Or another opponent to the agitated mind is counting the breath, counting each cycle of in and out as one, counting each breath from 1 to 10. And if we lose the object, setting the count to 1 again. And if we reach 10 without interruption, counting a second cycle of 10. Turn our attention to the out-breath. Feel that with each out-breath, we exhale old, stale air from our body. Cause of heaviness, fatigue, illness, and so forth. Feel that with each out-breath, it is expelled from our body in the form of black smoke and dissolves into empty space. Turn our attention to the in-breath. Feel that with each in-breath, we draw in very clean, fresh, invigorating air. Such as air from the high mountains, from the great ocean, from the forest, and so forth. Feel this perfect, pure, fresh air pervade our body and mind. Turning our concentration to the out-breath. Feel that with each exhalation, we expel all our ill health, our stress and tension, our worries, our bad conditions, all of our cares and problems. Feel that with each out-breath, these leave us in a form of dark smoke. And dissolve into the empty space in front of us. Then concentrating again on the in-breath. Think that with each in-breath, we draw in the power, blessing and inspiration of all enlightened beings. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We feel that with each in-breath, their joy, wisdom, compassion, and inspiration flood into us. Pervading our body and mind. In the form of white light. Body and mind are completely oneness with this pure, joyous white light. And our body becomes as clear as crystal. We can dedicate the merit of our short meditation, thinking by this practice of the yoga of relaxation, may I quickly develop all my positive potential, my compassion, love, energy, wisdom, and so forth. May I quickly subdue my mind of self-cherishing. May I myself and all living beings, without exception, quickly, easily, effortlessly attain the state of enlightenment, Buddhahood, for the benefit of all beings. And then release our attention. Finish the meditation. So I hope you're feeling relaxed because I'm going to hit you with suffering. Chapter 13 is the next chapter in the Path to Enlightenment, and its title is Suffering. But before we jump right into it, it is, I think, this discussion, that of the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, does benefit from some context and reflection, because it's often misunderstood, particularly by we Westerners. I think we can easily take it the wrong way. And I think a good way to approach it, or hopefully a good way to approach it, is firstly to zoom out a bit and reflect where this fits in within the Path to Enlightenment. So we know that the Path to Enlightenment, the way that the core teachings are explained and structured is according to the three scopes: the small scope, the medium scope, and the great scope. And so far in this course, over the past, since early 2021, we've covered the small scope subjects and just begun on the medium scope subjects. So as we know, the aim of the small scope teachings is that if we practice them, if we, through doing that, achieve the realization, the natural realization or understanding of those subjects, then it will remove the causes of a lower rebirth within cyclic existence and create the causes of a higher rebirth in cyclic existence. The main way, or the specific way that it does that, it's not magic, is that what all of the teachings of the small scope lead up to is the realization of karma. So all of the other teachings within the small scope are really the foundation for developing an accurate and complete and abiding understanding of karma. And if we have that, if we have a natural intuitive realization of the link between our actions and their results through the practice of the small scope, then without difficulty, we are going to avoid the causes of lower rebirths, and we're going to cultivate the causes of higher rebirths. We would no more be motivated to engage in an action that created a lower rebirth than we at the moment would be inclined if we saw a fire to stick our hand in a fire. Just naturally, we've achieved that degree of realization that we're going to avoid the negativities that will lead us to a lower rebirth. So when we think about it like that, that is an extraordinary achievement. So it's important to not think about it in terms of we've got small scope, medium scope, great scope. Great scope is extraordinary, that's Buddhahood, so therefore small scope is not really anything special. If we have the realization of the practice of small scope, and when we get that realization step by step through practicing the path of enlightenment, that's an absolutely extraordinary realization. And any practitioner who actually has that realization is really to be respected. The medium scope teachings, however, look further. They look beyond that. So the starting position is if we achieve the realization of the small scope, we're going to avoid the worst types of experience in cyclic existence or samsara. But we won't have removed the causes of cyclic existence altogether. And from the perspective of the medium scope, any experience of cyclic existence, whether it's in the highest of high rebirths or the lowest of low rebirths, any experience of cyclic existence is ultimately inadequate. It's not good enough. It will always be impermanent because it's a product. Any product is impermanent, and it will always ultimately be unsatisfactory. That is to say, it will be incapable of satisfying us. And we can get a sense of that if we consider the position of the wealthiest and most privileged people on this planet. So there's no shortage of examples that tell us directly that having great wealth, enormous power, enormous privilege is no guarantee of good physical health, certainly no guarantee of great mental health. It's no guarantee that one will have enduring and positive personal relationships. It's no guarantee, if you've got all of those things, that you're going to have a peaceful and fulfilling life. And ultimately, even if you have great time, when it's over, it's over. So from that point of view, from the perspective of the medium scope, whatever our experience in cyclic existence, it can never fully satisfy. Can fully satisfy us. Sorry. So the medium scope teachings are structured according to the Four Noble Truths, and I think Pam mentioned a couple of weeks ago the reason why they're called the Four Noble Truths. So it's not because they're really important and respected Buddhist teachings, and so therefore we have to respect them and they're noble. It's not that at all. What it refers to is the fact that if we are an Arya, that is, if we have direct perception of reality, then in Sanskrit, the term for Arya, the translation of that is that we're a noble one. And so what the Four Noble Truths are about is that if we've accumulated our wisdom to the point that we directly and correctly perceive the way things actually are, then this is what we understand. This is how we see the world. So as we know from Buddhism generally, and specifically from the teachings of the Abhidharma Sutra, any Buddhist teaching we should check up and we should relate to our own experience to see if it resonates, even if it is a noble truth, because we've got to figure that out for ourselves. So the essence of the Four Noble Truths, true sufferings, they explain why any experience of cyclic existence is ultimately unsatisfactory. And remembering that what cyclic existence refers to is our own 5 aggregates being bound by delusion and karma, or our own body and mind being conditioned, driven, influenced, impelled by our own previous karma and by the habit of delusion that continues to produce. Any type of existence that is propelled, conditioned by that, is going to have the experience of true sufferings. And unpack that, because we need to understand what true sufferings means. It doesn't exactly mean that bad stuff is going to happen to us. Secondly, the second truth is true cause. So why is it that we experience cyclic existence and its faults? Why is it that any living being that functions the way that we do, whose body and mind is bound by delusion and karma, why is it that we have this continuing experience of suffering? Where does it fundamentally come from? And the second truth, the true cause, explains what the causes of cyclic existence are, and hence what the cause of our own suffering is. Thirdly, it points out, well, if we can understand the causes of cyclic existence, then that's the first step to be able to reverse them. And in principle, if we understand, well, this is what causes cyclic existence, that gives us confidence that if we're able to reverse those causes, we're able to remove the effects, the experience of cyclic existence. And the state whereby we are free of cyclic existence is a state of liberation or nirvana or true cessation. So this is the third truth, that by reversing the causes of cyclic existence, we cease suffering, which is the result of cyclic existence. And then from that, we can extrapolate and figure out what is the method for doing that. What is the method from moving to a state where we're currently affected by the causes of cyclic existence? How do we go about removing and reversing those causes? And this is the fourth truth, or the teachings on true paths. The way this is explained in Path to Enlightenment in the medium scope is it's set out in chapters 12 through to 16, and is a simplified outline of the main parts of the medium scope teachings on page 379, which is the beginning of part 4 of the text. So basically, this subject is explained in 4 parts. So firstly, we have the actual training, and that's covered in chapters 12 to 16. The criterion of having attained a medium scope, I'll come back to that. Clearing misconceptions about the criterion, and then establishing the nature of the path to liberation. So of these teachings, the vast bulk of it is in that first of the 4 parts, in the actual training in the paths of medium scope. The criterion of having attained the medium scope, that is really only dealt with in a few paragraphs in chapter 16, and all that, and what that is really getting at is, well, we're practicing the medium scope. How is it that we know that we've actually realised it? What would we look for in our own mental continuum that would enable us to think, great, I've nailed the medium scope, I can now go on to the great scope. The third one, again, is also dealt with very quickly in chapter 16, and it's sort of saying, well, when you're checking out the criterion, if you've actually attained the medium scope, here's some things to look out for that you could be mistaken about. So clearing misconceptions about the criterion. And in chapter 17, there's a fairly establishing the nature of the path to liberation, which deals with the 4th part. There's a general, a fairly high level description of the path that we take in order to achieve liberation based on the medium scope approach. But the full outline, of course, you can see that, the full outline of the path of medium scope with all of the subdivisions in Geshe's outline section of the path to enlightenment, and in particular his explanation of, or his structure of the medium scope teachings, that begins on page 923 and goes all the way through to 928. And as with the outline generally, to get a really good working understanding of the path of enlightenment, it's very helpful to become familiar with the outline. So if we look at that outline, it will explain not only those four major divisions, but also all of the major subdivisions, and then the finer divisions within that. So it's a really, really good way to become familiar with the text. So as I mentioned, the first of those four major divisions is by far the bulk of part 4 of the medium scope. That's where we'll find most of the teachings on how to train in the practices of the medium scope. And the way that's dealt with effectively is that it's in two parts. So the two subparts for that are firstly identifying the mind that aspires for liberation, and that's a relatively short section that's covered in chapter 12, and Pam's already taken us through that a few weeks back. So once we've identified the mind that aspires for liberation, well, then the next thing we need to know is the method for developing that mind for aspiring for liberation, and that's the next part, the next of those two subparts. Underneath that, so how do we actually go about developing the mind that aspires for liberation? What is the method for doing that? Again, that is explained in two parts, and these are set out on page 388. So the two things we need to know about the method for actually generating a mind that aspires for liberation is firstly contemplating suffering and its sources, and that's covered in chapters 13 to 15, and secondly, the 12 links of dependent origination, which we'll come to in a few weeks' time. The first one, where we are at the moment, so we're talking about contemplating suffering and its sources, and the main divisions of this are on the top of page 389. Two things that we're looking at. Firstly, contemplating suffering. I beg your pardon, I'm out one level. The two parts of this, contemplating suffering and its sources, the divisions of that are on the bottom of page 388, and it's all in the title. The two parts of that are firstly contemplating suffering, and secondly contemplating sources, so how one engages in cyclic existence by the way of true source. So those two divisions are really covering the first noble truth and the second noble truth. Of those, at the moment, we're looking at the first one, contemplating suffering to see the disadvantages of cyclic existence. And the two parts of that, in turn, and this is where I was before, on the top of page 389, looking at why the Buddha taught suffering first, which Anna took us through last week, and then the actual meditation on suffering, which is where we are going next. And that explanation, the actual meditation on suffering, as we'll see, we look at that from the point of view of the general sufferings of cyclic existence, that is, the types of suffering that any living being within cyclic existence is bound to experience, and secondly, specific sufferings of particular types of rebirth state. But we've got a while until we get to that. So, before we leap into talking about the actual meditation on suffering, the nature of suffering and so forth, as I said, I think it's useful to set a little bit of context. And in doing this, I'll cover some of the material that Anna and Pam have gone over in the last couple of weeks. This is really important because this subject, the Four Noble Truths, is in some ways the essence of Buddha's teaching. As we know, it's the very first thing that the Buddha taught when he arose from enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya. And also it's useful, I think, because the first noble truth can be, and often is, easily misunderstood. So the very first reaction that we might have is, well, why would we go about contemplating suffering at all? How can that possibly be a useful activity? Here I am, I've got this beautiful autumn Sunday afternoon. Am I really going to sit around and contemplate suffering? How can that be a sensible and positive use of my time? Isn't thinking about suffering, isn't that unpleasant itself? And isn't that itself a form of suffering? Aren't we just inflicting on ourselves the thing that we're saying that the Buddha doesn't like? Isn't it much healthier to think about all the positive things in life, the things that we enjoy? And if we did that, wouldn't that make us more positive and happy and optimistic and so forth? So there are quite a few critiques of Buddhism like this that are based on that sort of view of the First Noble Truth. So there are even some Buddhist in-jokes about the fact that Buddhists seem to be completely preoccupied with suffering. They're talking about it all the time, secretly. It sounds like they really love it. That they really love it. There's one history of a book that I read that was published in the 1990s that was a history of Buddhism in Australia, and it talked about some of the earliest Western Buddhist groups that were set up in Sydney around the middle of the 20th century, and it were particularly influenced by I think by monks from Thailand or Burma who had come out to Australia and taught Buddhism to a number of people who were really encountering it for the first time. And a lot of the commentary was about the fact that these newly born Western Buddhists were incredibly enthusiastic, incredibly interested, incredibly passionate, and what they really took on board was this focus on asceticism and frugality. And one person was talking particularly about the way that they interpreted the First Noble Truth, and that there was kind of a sense within this group that if you're a good Buddhist, since the Buddha had said that the very nature of our existence is suffering, well, then you kind of should look as if you were suffering most of the time. And if you weren't actually suffering and looking miserable, well, then what were you? Were you some sort of heretic? Because since the Buddha has said, well, actually, the nature of your existence is suffering, so why aren't you wandering around looking totally miserable the whole time? And of course, this person laughed about it in retrospect, and that sort of understanding of it is a misunderstanding, but it's one that people can. It's a way that we can. It's something that we can fall into if we don't understand what the First Noble Truth is about. According to Buddha, the sole reason, the sole point of understanding suffering, of getting a really good handle on it, is to be able to eliminate it completely and forever. In fact, I think it would be reasonable to say, but I could be challenged on this, that you could argue that Buddhists reject suffering in a more radical and thorough way than any philosophical or cultural tradition or religious tradition that's ever existed on the earth. The Buddhist take on suffering is that there is nothing whatsoever that is good about it, nothing whatsoever. The only benefit of any suffering experience is that it might deepen our understanding of suffering, it might awaken us to where that's coming from, and therefore motivate us to eliminate suffering altogether. So if we're really practicing the Buddha Dharma on that issue, we're not into half measures. So Buddhism isn't just about relaxing and being a little bit more peaceful. It's not about looking for some sort of band-aid solution, for getting some sort of temporary relief for our problems like taking an aspirin. It's not just about improving the quality of our life or the wellness of our life, although incidentally, if we practice meditation, practice positive actions, practice positive minds, it will bring about that effect. But that isn't the aim. That isn't what Buddhism is really trying to do, to merely improve the quality of our life. It's about eliminating any possibility of suffering whatsoever and forever. And practicing within a Mahayana framework, it's about doing that for everyone, about eliminating the suffering of every living being that exists in this realm and in all realms, not just ourselves. So if you think about it from that point of view, it's not the first noble truth that's the most important. It's actually the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, that is really the main game from a Buddhist perspective, because that's actually what all of our Buddhist practice is ultimately aimed at achieving. True cessation means eliminating all suffering, even the most subtle form of suffering, and completely removing any cause of suffering, so that there is no possibility of experiencing suffering again once we have achieved liberation. When we achieve the cessation of suffering, our experience is one of uninterrupted enjoyment, uninterrupted bliss, accompanied by profound peace, profound wisdom, profound compassion, and limitless energy. So that's ultimately what the point of understanding suffering and its causes is about. That's what it's leading to. And again, we can see this in real life if we look at really experienced Buddhist practitioners, those that we might know personally, so High Lamas, or those whose teachings we might have attended, or even seen videos of, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Geshe Acharya Thubten Loden, for those of us who are fortunate enough to receive teachings from him, Venerable Tenzin Palmo, and so forth, so many high Buddhist teachings. The thing that really strikes you about these practitioners who have plumbed these subjects most deeply, the ones who have done extensive retreats on the Four Noble Truths, including the suffering nature of cyclic existence, they don't come across as at all miserable or beaten down or despondent as a result of doing that. Compared to most of us, they have this natural lightness. Laughter comes to them much more easily. The sorts of things, the sorts of ups and downs that we have in our lives that can easily disrupt our happiness are things that they take much more easily and much more seriously. So to me, it seems the proof that the pudding is in the eating. If you practice these teachings, it doesn't make you more miserable. So from a Buddhist point of view, the best possible ordinary enjoyment we could have out of life will never be enough. It will never be good enough. If somebody said that they had a completely reliable method whereby we would have a life that had perfect physical health, we had unbounded material wealth, we had a wonderful, fulfilling relationship, we had an affectionate, adoring circle of friends and family, and we would have that for the whole of our life, from a Buddhist perspective, you might argue, well, really, is that all? Why would you bother looking for something like that when you can, with your perfect human rebirth, you can achieve something that's much better, something that that isn't impermanent, that doesn't end at the end of this life, and it brings continuous benefit for yourself and others, and it eliminates any possibility of suffering in the future. So another objection that we might have to the teachings of suffering is, well, okay, I get it. You Buddhists, you're really keen on getting rid of suffering, but why do you have to talk about it all the time? So why do we have to focus on it continuously? Like, do you really need to convince people that there's a whole lot of suffering in the world? Don't we know that? So don't we see that every time we turn on the TV at the moment? We look at what's happening in Ukraine. We look at what has been happening to us all, to all human beings across the globe with COVID in the last couple of years. Every time when we see the mass shootings in the US, the natural disasters that regularly afflict different parts of the world. Don't we already know from our own experience, day in and day out, and whether we're talking about really difficult situations, the really big challenges that we all from time to time face in our lives, whether they're health challenges, financial challenges, relationship challenges, and so forth. Don't we know from that that life isn't always a bed of roses? So why do we have to spend so much time talking about this? According to the Buddha, the answer is no. We don't really get suffering. At the best, we have a superficial understanding of it. But we don't understand where it comes from, and we certainly don't understand what to do about it at a fundamental or reliable level. Often in our lives, we have this recurring fantasy. So often we can fall into thinking, well, my life might not be perfect now. I've got this thing that's a real problem that's really bugging me. But if I can just sort that, well, then everything's going to be okay. So right now, I'm in this difficult job. I've got this boss who's making my life really, really difficult. As soon as I get out of this job and find another one, well, then my problems are solved. Then life will be good. Of course, we know that when we get the new job, that the new job may not be actually an improvement on the old one. And even if it is an improvement on the old one, there'll be something else that comes up in our life. So we keep telling ourselves these things. We just need to change a couple of things in our life. We just need to sort the problems that are preoccupying us right now, and then everything's going to be okay. But we never actually get to the end of the rainbow and are able to claim that pot of gold. And even though we don't do that, we have this pattern of always thinking that we're going to be able to do that next time. And the reason that we do that is that we don't really understand the nature of our experience as living beings whose experience is governed by delusion and karma. That is, by living beings who experience cyclic existence. If you think about it another way, we can't get rid of suffering unless we have a really clear understanding of what it actually is. So there's a recent example that illustrates the logic of this. So in late 2019, doctors in southwest China started noticing people falling ill with a respiratory disease. And the symptoms of that disease were quite similar to, but not quite the same as, those of flu and other viruses that people are commonly afflicted by. But over time, by looking at what was happening and doing medical tests, it was clear that there was a new viral disease. There was a new kid on the block in the virus world, and it was a very contagious disease. And health authorities in China and then across the world recognised that, in fact, this thing that looked superficially like other common diseases was something new. It was a new disease that they called COVID-19. So you could say this is a bit like the truth of COVID-19. This is like the first COVID truth. Suppose that hadn't happened. So suppose the existence of COVID-19 hadn't been recognised in late 2019, early 2020. What would have happened is that people would have just gone on getting sick with this new virus, and nobody would have noticed that it was something new. If that had happened, if the truth of COVID hadn't been recognised, then this new disease would have spread throughout the world virtually without any restriction whatsoever. Nobody would have even thought about any possible treatments for it because it wouldn't have been identified that there was this new disease at all in the first place. The result of that would have been that many more people would have become seriously ill and died. There would have been no public health measures, no vaccines. And so without that, as terrible as our experience of COVID-19 has been, if we hadn't recognised it for what it was, identified the truth of COVID, then things would have been very much worse. So we had to recognise the truth of COVID, of the existence of COVID, as the first step. Once scientists had done that, once they'd identified the first truth, the truth of COVID, their next step was to investigate what caused it. And they were able to establish that it was caused by a new virus called SARS-CoV-2. So that established the second truth, the truth of the cause of COVID. By understanding the cause of COVID and investigating the properties of this virus, the way that it behaved, its chemical structure and so forth, scientists could find the methods for dealing with COVID-19 and with the virus itself. So they recognised the third COVID truth, that it was possible to reverse the effects of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and thereby prevent COVID-19. So this is like the third truth, the realisation of true cessations. And then, having established that it would be possible in principle to do something about COVID, scientists could actually come up with methods for dealing with it. So they could investigate the spike proteins on the virus, for example, and from that draw inferences about the types of vaccines that would be effective in dealing with it. And so when they discovered that, the way of dealing with COVID, this is like the fourth truth of COVID, the path to mitigating or combating COVID-19. But the point is that none of this would have been possible unless they had first recognised the first COVID truth, that COVID actually existed as a thing. We need to recognise suffering to really, really understand it and not just be buffeted around by it, not just be overwhelmed by it, not just take it for granted. We need to really have an expert understanding of the nature of our experience as being within cyclic existence for the same reason. Because until we have that, then we aren't really empowered to effectively and profoundly challenge the suffering within our own mental within our own mental continuum. So that leads into the explanation of suffering in chapter 13 of Path to Enlightenment. And as I mentioned, the first division of the explanation explains why the Buddha taught suffering first, and Anna covered that last week, so I won't go into more detail on that, except to remind us that the very first thing that the Buddha did after he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya was to wander up the road a little way up to Sarnath and give the teachings, these teachings of the Four Noble Truths to the ascetics that he'd previously practiced with before he'd sat under the Bodhi tree. And the very first thing that he explained was the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. Again, it's useful just to go back over some of in brief, over the way Geshe introduces this subject in the early parts of chapter 13. And the reason that that's important is that because it illustrates the way the teachings of the Four Noble Truths fit in with the rest of the Path to Enlightenment practice and the Path to Enlightenment subject matter. It explains the way the Path to Enlightenment is a dependent arising. So the major subject that Geshe talks here firstly about is renunciation. So we might think that renunciation refers to retreating from the world, going and living in a cave, having a very simple diet and so forth, undergoing austerities. But that isn't what it implies from a Buddhist point of view. As Geshe explains here, what renunciation refers to is a mental attitude that correctly understands the nature of cyclic existence, the truth of suffering, the fact that while we are in cyclic existence, we will inevitably and continuously have the experience of suffering, that, or to put it perhaps in a more accurate way, that we can never be fully satisfied while we are in cyclic existence, even if we don't have a manifest experience of suffering. We can never be fully satisfied while we are samsaric beings. Renunciation is the mind that sees that realises the implications of that, and decisively turns away from it. The attitude that says, I get that, I see what's happening, I want no more of it. I don't want the results of suffering, I don't want the causes of suffering. I'm over having the mind of self-cherishing as the main thing that motivates my life, the main filter through which I see the universe. I can see the way that it works, I can see the way that I have this mind of self-cherishing, how it generates my mind of anger, my mind of irritation, my mind of grasping, my mind of big ego. I can see what's going on. I don't like it. I don't want it. I want to be done with it. That's what the mind of renunciation refers to. The way we develop that mind of renunciation isn't by going and living in a cave. It's by understanding the way that psychic existence works, by understanding the Four Noble Truths. The other point that Geshe makes is that for Mahayana practitioners, for people who are path to enlightenment practitioners, we can be really inspired by the extraordinary and heroic mind of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, I think, is for many people the most inspiring, positive state of mind any living being could possibly have. The mind that aspires to completely overcome all difficulties, all obstacles, not for our own benefit, but in order to advance the welfare of every other living being without exception, and is determined to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes in order to accomplish the welfare of every living being, whatever they've done to us, whatever their relationship to us, however kind they've been to us, however destructive they've been to us, leaving no living being behind. So from a Buddhist point of view, a Mahayana point of view, we can be really inspired by this beautiful, extraordinary mind. We can't get within an inch, a millimetre of this mind unless we have renunciation. And we can only develop renunciation by developing this understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So unfortunately, suffering isn't optional. Understanding suffering, meditating on the various types of suffering, or to put it another way, in a way that may be more helpful, meditating on the way in which psychic existence is always going to be unsatisfactory is necessary if we are going to progress on the path, if we're going to bring ultimate benefit to ourselves and others. So I've run out of time, so we probably should wind up there for today. Questions. We probably don't have time for questions anyway. What I'm going to suggest generally is, because usually I find we ask for questions and there aren't any. So if people have any, then by all means send them in by email, send them in via Facebook, or if you have a particular question that you'd like me to answer, then you can talk to me personally and I can deal with it in the next class. But otherwise, we'll go straight on to the prayers. So we'll do the final Lamrim Prayer. I think I started doing it in Tibetan, didn't I? Yeah, I'll do it in Tibetan, if you've got it ready. Thanks, Mark. So this is on page 30. Deni ring du bele tsognini kata yang pa gangshi sapare lobe mari kidong drowanam namdren jawe wampo da gyuchi dema sumpe tsera kuntuyam Jampe yang chi tsewe jesu Tempa rimpa kun sang lam ji chu Yene rupe jel jam je shu Rangi ji shin tope lam ji ne Chundra tsewe drangwe tap je chi Drowe chi min pusal jol je ne Jawe tampa yun ring zen ju Tampa rin chin chogi ma chapa cha chan yampa jupe chodene inge champo ira chopai pende te de sewa je pashu se che jawe me jung trin le ju jang chu lam ji riam pai chu Aro nanchi la pelteshing, Gelwe tse pareng do changju chik. Lamza tu pe ton chen ru je ching, Gel chen tsel je me dang me ming kong. Tsera kun tu jelwe nga pai, Nanda lamda dwewa ma chu chik. Gang se te pa cho la cho cho chu, cho jin ru la don pe de tsi, do de nam chi ta tu dong je ching, cha shi ja zo chu kun ja chu chi. By the two collections, vast as space, amassed with effort for a long time, I have become a chief of conquerors, a guide for all beings whose mind's eye is blinded by ignorance. Also in all lives will not yet come to that, may Manjushri favour me with his compassion. Finding the supreme path, complete with all stages of the teachings, may I please the conquerors by practising well. By my precise understanding of the essential points of the path, with skillful means drawn along by strong compassion, and by dispelling the mental darkness of beings, may I uphold the conqueror's teaching for a long time. Where the supreme precious teaching has not spread, also where it has spread but become degenerate, with a mind deeply moved by great compassion, may I make clear this treasure of benefit and bliss. The stages of the path, excellently established by the marvellous deeds of the conquerors and their sons, give glory to the minds of those aspiring to liberation. May the conquerors' deeds be long preserved. May all humans and non-humans remove the obstructions and establish conditions favourable to cultivating the excellent path, never be parted through all of their lifetimes in the purest of paths which the Buddhas have praised. When someone makes effort to practice properly the 10 points of conduct of the Supreme Vehicle, may he always be assisted by the mighty protectors, and may oceans of good fortune spread out, reaching all. And then the general dedication in Tibetan and English. Gewadi che bogun sonam yeshe sog shen sonam yeshe le jongwe Damba kuni topashu. By this virtue, may all beings complete the collections of wisdom and merit, and attain the two holy bodies arisen from wisdom and merit. Jiangju Sem Chogrim Ochi Marche Panam Chejuchi Cheba Nyamba Mebaye Gone Gondu May the precious superior mind of enlightenment be generated in those who have not yet generated it, and not decrease in those who have developed it, but increase continuously. Thanks everybody. Sorry for rushing a bit at the end time. Kind of got away from me. I just realised where we are up to. So if you're here, please come and relieve your suffering with some beautiful cake and a cup of tea. Thanks everybody.